I would say that one of the most important things you as a director can do is be present in your schools. And I had one principal use the analogy from scripture that, you can tell a good shepherd when he smells like a sheep.
Any of my episodes, my obsession with the differences between one province and another within Canada. And Domenic Scuglia is my guest today, who has served in both Ontario and Saskatchewan, my home province. And so I was very curious to learn how those two provinces are similar and different. Lots of similarities, lots of differences as well. Domenic is somebody that I met a couple times, and one thing I knew about Domenic that I asked him towards the end is his love of rugby, which is not a sport that most Canadians play, although it has certainly its following, but lessons he's learned from rugby that have served him in his current role as director, CEO of York Catholic School District in York, Ontario, the Metro Toronto region. This episode is brought to you by Advanced Learning Partnerships, aka ALP. We are a professional learning consulting group serving communities across North America. We are partners, designers, and agents for change, and you can learn more about the work we do at alp.com. And now on to my interview with Domenic Scuglia.
Well, Dom, it's good to see you. The last time I saw you in person, I believe you were sitting in an office in Regina, Saskatchewan.
Correct.
Here you are today in the York region outside of Toronto. So I'm always curious about the way in which different provinces work and in terms of your role. You just talk a little bit about the way in which you, I think, specifically work with the other regions around you here versus how that worked in Saskatchewan.
Yeah, no, for sure, Dean. So I would say to respond to that question that there are a number of similarities and there are also some differences. So let me start with the similarities. The city of Regina has a population of about 203,000 people. Like the province of Ontario, Catholic schools are funded through denominational rights. So we receive the same funding the public schools do. So the relationship that I needed to forge with my counterpart in Regina Public, was an important one because conversations would always need to occur that making sure we were aligned in decisions that we were making that would be serving our communities, our students and their families, and of course our staff. And the same has occurred here in Ontario and York region. I have a strong connection with my counterpart here in the York region. Well, that we make sure we touch base on a regular basis that our notions and plans for serving our communities are aligned. We share transportation here in Ontario. We were just starting that when I was in Saskatchewan because your schools are within close proximity of each other, and in some cases they're right beside each other because what they had done, the government of Saskatchewan, to save money is they built Catholic and public schools side by side. So they would share sometimes facilities, but the buildings were separate and distinct in the way they operated. And so buses would be going to the same place, and you'd have to be not a good investment of taxpayers' money to have two separate buses. So we learned to share in those scenarios. The differences would be just the sheer size, the number of students and people you're dealing with. My school division in Regina, 12,000 students, 1,500 staff. Here in York region, I have 50,000 students and we have 8,000 staff. So there's a big difference there. And then when you look at it from the provincial lens, we had 29 school boards in Saskatchewan, the opportunity to get together more frequently and engage in provincial conversations. The opportunities were easier to arrange, whereas here we're 72 different school boards for four separate entities. You have English public, English Catholic, French public, French Catholic, and we're spread over a massive geographical area, which makes it very difficult to get together face to face with my colleagues across the province to discuss matters related to education. Well, we do get together twice a year. So, at a very high level, Dean, those would be some of the reflections that I'll share with you in the differences between the two provinces and the similarities.
Well, the other thing that strikes me, of course, and I think you and I talked about this in a previous conversation, that your role has gotten more political over the years.
Hmm.
And as we see the media bringing out all kinds of issues to people, there sometimes seems like there's a big tension between boards of education and ministries of education. And yet I know that you work, especially in Saskatchewan, but I think even in Ontario, but maybe not quite so much, work pretty hard to actually forge relationships with the ministry themselves that 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 supported the work you do. Could you just talk a little bit about the significance of that in your role and why it's so important, and how you actually do have had success in forging relationships with whatever ministries of education you're working with.
Yeah, you can't underscore the importance of that relationship. The provinces, whether it's Ontario or Saskatchewan, they set the direction for the curriculum and for policies that they expect would be operationalized in each of the different school boards. So we work closely with the ministry. Again, it would have been more frequent interaction with the ministry when I was in Saskatchewan because we were smaller. We were able to meet once a month with the Ministry of Education. Here, it's more ad hoc. Formally, we meet twice a year, so there's less interaction here. Nevertheless, the communication from the ministry to the school boards is regular and frequent, so we have an understanding that we're supposed to operationalize ministry direction. One of the things that I would say, well, I would notice as different is that there would have been more collaboration between the school boards in Saskatchewan and the Ministry of Education in determining policy moving forward. And that was just a factor of the fact that we were smaller and that we had the opportunity to meet more frequently. I'm finding here in Ontario, decisions are made at the ministry level and then are disseminated to school boards with less opportunity for input from the school boards that operationalize the ministry directions.
Well, and I think it sets expectations because, when you grow up in Saskatchewan, even even the people living in Regina, many of them have rural farming backgrounds. They maybe grew up in small towns, so their expectation to, be on first name basis with people and work collaboratively may be greater. You go to an urban center where, you don't expect to see I mean, even you yourself, the visibility that you would have as a director in Ontario is going to be less than what you'd had in Regina, just simply because more schools, more people, excuse me, to try to navigate. So I just wonder, I'll be just doing some editing there. I just wonder the degree to which you have in your role now have tried to bring with you some of that. I don't know if it's collaboration, community, relationship, whatever term you want to have, that you think it's certainly this job is always about relationships. So how have you been thinking and working towards increased opportunities to connect with people in your new role in a larger district, in a larger populated area?
Yeah, that's an excellent question and an excellent observation. And I would say that one of the most important things you as a director can do is be present in your schools. And I had one principal use the analogy from scripture that, you can tell a good shepherd when he smells like a sheep. And so I have been intentional in my direction to ensure that we have 101 schools. So far, I have visited two-thirds in my 2 years, and I'm hoping in my third year to be able to visit the remaining schools. I can tell you that that has been a game changer. for me personally to be able to be on the ground in the school, seeing firsthand what's happening and seeing A, the celebrations that are happening in our schools, and B, the principal being given an opportunity to share some of the challenges so that when I come back to the board table, I'm able to share with confidence with the trustees, some of the challenges that our schools are facing. So that's been important. You had mentioned to me one of the other things I've done is I'm active on social media. And I use all of the platforms that we have as a school board. That's Twitter/X. Now I'm using Threads, I'm using Instagram, I'm using Facebook. And one of the things that we've started is a thing called Twitter Break. And so, Twitter Break, we do that around once a month and we look for celebrations in our schools. I'll go to the school, we'll bring cameras, and we will videotape a powerful, positive message about something that's happening in that school and then share it throughout the school board and on the World Wide Web. It's received a lot of positive feedback. We get lots of requests for me to come to schools and, hey, do Twitter Break at our school. Here's what
Right.
I'd like to do. So those are some of the ways that we try to keep the lines of communication and the relationship building piece alive, well, and moving forward.
I mean, that's such a such a powerful example of how to use social media in that way. I have a phrase that I use every once in a while, and that I talk to with leaders, and that is being narrative champions for your teachers, for your kids, because you have a voice. I mean, people are listening to you. So by you going out and doing that and shining light on the good work, I mean, the benefits of that go far beyond just shining a light on them. Speaks to the district. It speaks to the relationship you have. It's such a powerful thing. And I know I've had thoughts anyways about, social media in the last little while has not always been a great place. And it still is not a great place in many contexts and ways. But whenever you can leverage it in these positive ways and show people, the amazing things that are happening in the district, I just don't think you lose. You only benefit. So yeah, and I watched many of those Twitter breaks. They're fantastic, very
Oh,
kind of short, quick kind of things, but really, you can scan through 4 or 5 of those really quickly and get a strong sense of what's happening in the district.
yeah.
And speaking of that, I know you talked about, and you're very proud of, but also focused on the work around equity in the district. That's been a big thing. And I know it's in everyone's mission and vision statements, but it's always interesting to get down to the nitty gritty. Well, what do you mean by what does that look like in your Catholic, specifically around how you're actually trying to improve in this area?
Yeah. And again, just back to the very first question where you talked about the similarities and differences between the two provinces. Our schools, our communities are very different from when you and I went to school. And so we now are facing children who have come from all corners of the globe. And we have a diversity of children that come in and are eager to learn. And we still have the vast majority of instructional people and support staff in front of those kids whose skin color and racial background does not reflect the children who are there in front of them. So, and that also extends to the curricular material that we're using. So we have been intentional within our human resources department to make sure that we're looking for diversity in our hiring practices and instituting them in our policies so that we're intentional in that way. And secondly, we go out and source curricular material that includes images that reflect the diversity of the children who will be reading those curricular materials. And so it's been entrenched in our new strategic plan. It's one of our strategic commitments. And we acknowledge every day that that work is not easy, but it's important and critical because we are creating future citizens for the province of Ontario who will be needing to be equipped with working in a diverse workforce.
No, and it's powerful. And again, kudos to you. And I know you've done a lot of things with specifically around Black educators and sort of just really saying, here's a need. Let's see if we can help foster that. So again, kudos to you on that. The other part of this, I mean, they're not a million miles apart, I guess, is the whole idea of well-being. And, that has been part of Ontario's, I call them the big three in Ontario: as student achievement, equity, and well-being. These things have been the pillars of kind of the work that's happening. But here's the thing that I've observed with the well-being thing from an Ontario perspective. And I share this with I've shared this for a while. So Ontario, when they came out with student well-being as a focus, this is, probably now I'm going back 7, 8 years ago. It was a little bit groundbreaking. Nobody else was actually using that language and putting it front and center. So I was giving all of my, attention and praise to Ontario, saying, excellent work. Then I think what happened, 4 or 5 years into it, and this is even before COVID, was an acknowledgement that, oh my goodness, I don't think we can actually get real serious about student well-being unless we're actually talking about staff well-being as well. And I mean, I know you entered this district mid-COVID-ish kind of thing. And so you've seen a lot already in that area, and it's been probably a conversation that you've had for a while. Maybe just talk a little bit about what the role of, especially around workplace well-being, has been in your Catholic.
Yeah, so that's a great point too. And it also is one of our strategic commitments in our new multi-year strategic plan is looking after the well-being of both our students and our staff. And you've identified that, you can't have successful innovations in the classroom around well-being without making sure that the people who are delivering that well-being aren't looked after themselves. And so we have a number of initiatives through our human resources department that, provide regular check-ins with staff. We've got a number of supports available to staff. And I have to say, the Ministry of Education and the province of Ontario have also been intentional and generous in the funding and direction they have provided to school boards for initiatives that are related to well-being for both students and staff. So we have a person who's assigned to mental health in our school board. We call them the Mental Health League, and they're a trained psychologist, and their job is to coordinate the mental health initiatives system wide in our schools from a central perspective. And she has done an excellent job in supporting our schools, both from a staff perspective and also from a student perspective. So we have both staff and student ambassadors whose work is to support well-being in each of our schools. And I think that's a very important person because it's highlighting the importance of that work that needs to happen.
You mentioned, you're talking about sort of, if you're going to continue to be innovative, you have to have some of these things in place. And so again, nothing sort of works in silos by itself. Everything is connected. One of the most recent sort of innovative conversations, ideas, is around generative AI. And I'm always curious to know where people are at. And it's, the range is everywhere from, yeah, we've heard of it, we're starting to dabble, to, people really actually engage in policy writing. I know this is something that you, as your senior team, has actually embraced pretty recently. Just talk a little bit about kind of where you are in terms of how you want to see your Catholic leading in this area as a result of the way leadership approaches generative AI.
Yeah, and that's a very topical question you have because it was a conversation at our senior table yesterday, and it has been for the last year. It's not a secret that our students are already using artificial intelligence, whether it's Chat GPT or other pieces of software in their work already. And so, what we need to do is work in collaboration with our teachers and our support staff to navigate this in a positive way. Because generally, sometimes when you see this kind of innovation, it can be met with apprehension, with suspicion, with some negativity. And our approach is going to be none of that. We are going to embrace it. We recognize that it is the way of the future and that it will be in our schools if it already isn't being used in ways that we don't can't even imagine. So I'm meeting with my principals tomorrow, and I will be modeling my Chat GPT lesson that I used last year when I needed some assistance in creating a narrative for responding to a community need, and I needed some help in putting together my letter. And so I had signed up for Chat GPT and I put in some key words, and lo and behold, within seconds, I had a template for that I could adjust so that I personalized that I could use. What impressed me the most was that it really reflected my line of thinking. It was reading my mind and it reflected the message that I wanted to share with my community on the topic that I was going to be delivering this piece of literature with. So we are not going to shy away from the AI. We're embracing it. We're going to be telling our principals that they need to make the space for teachers to be comfortable because kids are using it, whether you like it or not. And so, what you need to do is how you're going to work collaboratively with your students to make sure that we're using it in a safe, positive, and engaging way so that it's going to be a win win.
Oh, that's fantastic. I have a second podcast that I've done a couple years ago. It's called Outside the Classroom, and it's highlighting interests that teachers and educators have outside the classroom. You have had quite a long career in rugby. Now, rugby is a, for a lot of us non-rugby people, it looks like a pretty aggressive, wicked sport. You think football is tough. Rugby looks crazy. I know, I'm just sure as an educator, you've along your journey have thought about lessons you've learned from rugby that you bring into education or leadership or whatever. Can you just, I mean, you don't have to go into your whole career in rugby because I know you're still involved, but what lessons have you learned from rugby in that time that you bring with you in your role today as an educator?
Yeah, that's there's many, but I would say that the most important quality value that you take away from the sport of rugby is that, and you've described the game quite well, and that, it looks like a hooligans type of game because you've got 30 people on a field that are going at each other with intense physicality. But the best part is that when that match is completed, that the opposition will line up and cheer the other team off, and there's a shaking of hands, and then there's a formal gathering socially of both teams to talk about the game. And there isn't any kind of animosity that's left on the field. When that game and that final whistle goes, it's all about the camaraderie and the relationship that you're going to forge with your opposition after the game is completed. And to highlight that is the World Cup of Rugby, men's Cup of Rugby started last weekend. And so I watched a number of games on the weekend, and it didn't stop in any of the games that I watched. At the end, the opposition players are exchanging their jerseys. So they're taking their jerseys off and giving it to their opposite number and, having a conversation about the game. Then there's an embrace, a hug, and well wishes, knowing that they're going to see each other later after the game in another meal. And quite possibly those two teams could be meeting again in the future. So that's a great quality of the game that I've taken away, and I think it extends into the work that I do in education as well, because you find yourself at times where you're in a difficult circumstance, but at the end, you may agree to disagree. We're going to shake hands and move forward.
That's powerful. I mean, I don't know. really much at all about rugby. So that's something I had never thought of. But as you're describing it, I'm thinking right away to, the need that we have in society for civil discourse, right? I mean, there are so many, and I mean, I mean, you can meet anybody and all of a sudden within moments, you're talking about a topic where have some pretty strong opinions on either side of it. And, our ability to sort of separate the issues from the human side of it is not easy. And we, and this is why we have some of the problems that we have today. So what a great lesson to be able to say, you know what, like I love to talk with you about issues that we disagree with, because there's an opportunity for me to learn from you as well, right? I have this. I also know I could be wrong. Probably in some cases, I know I could be wrong, but that's the way to learn. But yeah, just to be able to go head to head in, as you said, a super intense battlefield and come out shaking hands. I think that's what a powerful tenet to have in a sport. Thanks. I appreciate you sharing that one. All right, as we wrap up here, Dom, just a couple of questions that continue to be sort of on the lighter side of things. Anything you've been reading or listening to lately that you want to share with folks? It could be for pleasure, or it could be personal, professional as well.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I love reading, and I've read a number of really neat books this summer. I read a book by Dr. Defoe, Hanley Defoe, The Storm, talking about how to be resilient at difficult times. Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Holiday, another great book I read. And he uses a number of examples of leaders who were successful when they parked their ego, and leaders who were not successful when ego got in the way. And really good lessons coming out of that book. And then I read a book by Desmond Cole, The Skin We're In. And I found that book really powerful as well. He's a local journalist in the city of Toronto, and he has had as an advocate, a black advocate, and he had a number of examples of stories I've read, but he provided insights I didn't have and prior to knowing from his perspective, and that was a great book. And for fun, I love reading historical fiction. I read Leon Uris's Redemption, and it's the second part sequel to the first book he wrote, which is called Trinity of Fun. And in terms of watching TV, I just finished the third season of Ted Lasso. Highly recommend that series. What a great story. There are many, many lessons that are learned from each of the short episodes in that three-part series of Ted Lasso. So those would be my
Nice. Yeah. And, I would encourage you, if you don't already, Dom, when you're meeting with your principals tomorrow, so an activity I love is just giving people a quick time to talk about what they're reading. Cause I think what you did, even by sharing that, is modeling yourself as a learner.
Right.
But listen, and again, I think, including in there some historical fiction, because you can't be just doing self-help and work all the time. You need a little break. And so the Ted Lassos, the other kind of stuff, I think that's a great modeling too. So I think you doing that, and then and I love it, asking people that question, because that's how I get recommendations. Like,
Yeah,
oh,
sure.
that sounds like the ego book sounds very fascinating to me. So
And a number of my team members have purchased it and are reading it now.
yeah. Yeah. So again, continue to share that one. Last question. Listen, I am coming to the Toronto area next week for a few days, and, I'm going to try to catch a Jays game, and I'm familiar with the city, but I always am curious from locals to say, like, here's a thing that might not be in your first result of things to do in the area. It could be a restaurant. It could be a little park. It could be, I don't know, what's something that maybe is a hidden gem that you found that you think others should maybe check out.
Yeah. So if you're actually going to be in the downtown core, I would go to St. Lawrence Market. It's just a massive market, not far from the Rogers Center. You could walk to it and get yourself a pea meal and egg and cheese sandwich at Carousel. It's to die for. Just a heads up, cash only. Uh,
That's
um,
usually means a good, if it's cash only, it usually means this is worth it, man. Get yourself your
yeah,
cash.
and just I'm a foodie, and so that kind of place really excites me. You walk around the market, and it's
Yeah.
got just about every kind of food available for you to either taste or purchase. But certainly, Carousel would be one that I would recommend, where you can get yourself a beautiful breakfast sandwich and enjoy it while you're there in the downtown core of the city of Toronto.
That's a good tip. That's a good tip. I've been to St. Lawrence Market and but I didn't know about this egg sandwich, so now that's on my list.
Right.
Listen, Dom, it's been great to speak with you. I learned so much. Excited for you to continue to do your good work in Ontario. We miss you here in Saskatchewan, but hey, that's the way it goes. So
Yeah.
all the best.
Thank you, Dean. God bless.
All right.
Bye bye.
Bye.